I've always been close with my older sister, Emma. Growing up, we were the kind of siblings who shared everything: clothes, secrets, and even dreams for the future. But like any relationship, as we grew older, things started to shift. As much as I hated to admit it, there was a growing distance between us, one that neither of us seemed to acknowledge. I was 23, just out of college, and was still figuring out my own life. I had a job I liked, but it wasn't exactly where I saw myself long term. I was working hard, saving money, and trying to build a future that didn't feel like it was just a waiting game. Emma, on the other hand, was 30 and had 2 kids. A 6-year-old boy, Luke, and a 3-year-old girl, Sophia. She had married young, and life hadn't always been easy for her. Her husband, Dan, had recently lost his job, and they were living paycheck to paycheck. Emma was juggling her full-time job as a nurse and trying to take care of the kids, and I could see how tired she was. I understood how overwhelming it could get, but I also had my own life to manage. At first, when Emma asked me to babysit, I didn't think much of it. I was more than happy to help out, especially since she was going through a rough patch. A few hours here and there, no big deal. But as time went on, things started to change. It started small, just a couple of evenings a week, maybe a Saturday afternoon while she ran errands. But soon it became a regular thing. Emma started calling me more often, asking me to step in last minute when she couldn't find a sitter. "Could you take the kids for the weekend?" she'd ask, almost casually. "Dan's got an interview and I really need to work." Of course I'd agree. What was I supposed to do? She was my sister and I knew how hard she was trying. But as the weeks went on, I began to feel like I was being taken for granted. I was always available to watch the kids, but there was never any recognition of how much it was affecting my own life. I would cancel plans with my friends, reschedule work, or push my own goals aside just to be there for her. But the more I did it, the more it seemed like my time was becoming less valuable. One evening, after spending an entire Saturday watching the kids, I sat down with Emma. We were both exhausted, but I needed to address what had been weighing on me for a while. "Emma," I started hesitantly, "I love spending time with Luke and Sophia, but I'm starting to feel like I'm being asked to babysit all the time. I need to work on my own things too. I can't keep rearranging my life for this." She looked at me, her tired eyes softening, but there was a hint of defensiveness in her voice. I know. But you're family and I just don't have anyone else to help me right now. Dan's trying to find a job and I'm barely keeping it together. Please, I really need you right now." I felt a pang of guilt, but I also felt frustrated. "I get it, Emma. I really do. But I can't keep doing this for free. I have my own responsibilities. I have things I want to do too. I'm not asking for much, just a little respect for my time." Emma didn't respond at first, and the silence between us felt heavy. Finally she sighed. "I'm not asking for much. Just a few hours here and there. You don't have to cancel everything in your life. You're being dramatic." Her words stung. I wanted to be understanding, but I also knew that my own needs were valid. I wasn't being dramatic. I was tired. I was giving so much of myself without getting anything in return, and it was starting to affect my work, my social life, and my mental health. But instead of pushing back more, I let it slide. I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't want her to feel like I was abandoning her in her time of need. For the next few weeks, I kept babysitting whenever she asked. Weekends, evenings, even some weekdays. But the frustration continued to build inside me. I was feeling like more of a free babysitter than a sister. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was doing this not out of love, but out of obligation. Then one evening, after putting Sophia to bed, I sat down on the couch and scrolled through job listings. I had been thinking for a while about how I could use my free time more productively. I had skills, I had experience, and I had time to spare. Why not find a paying babysitting job? I could still help people, but I could also make money while doing it. It didn't take long before I found a family nearby who was looking for a part-time babysitter. They offered a decent hourly rate, and the hours were flexible enough for me to fit into my schedule. I sent them a message, and within a few days I had a job lined up. I felt a sense of relief and excitement. Finally, I was doing something for myself. I wasn't just giving up my time for free anymore. I was valuing my own efforts. The next day I called Emma. "Hey Emma," I said, trying to sound casual. "I found a babysitting job nearby. It's a paid gig and I think it's going to work out really well for me. I'm really excited about it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice tinged with irritation, she replied, "Wait, so you're telling me you're going to babysit for someone else but not for me?" I hesitated. I can't keep doing this for free, Emma. I need to earn money and I have my own life too. I'm still happy to help out, but I can't be your free sitter anymore. Her tone turned defensive. So now you're too good to help me out? I'm your sister. I'm struggling here and you're just going to take a paying job when I need you? I felt a knot form in my stomach. This was exactly what I had feared. She wasn't going to understand. I'm not saying I won't help you at all, I said, trying to calm the situation. But I can't keep dropping everything for you every single time. I need to take care of myself too. I don't think that's too much to ask. She didn't respond right away. Then through gritted teeth she said, fine, whatever. But don't expect me to ask you for help anymore. I'll figure it out myself. The conversation ended abruptly and I stood there, heart pounding. I had hoped that Emma would understand, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't be that simple. I had made my decision. I was going to keep this job and focus on building my own future. But at that moment I couldn't shake the feeling that things had just taken a turn. Our relationship was changing and I wasn't sure if it was for the better. The days that followed were tense. Emma and I hadn't spoken much after our conversation, and I could feel the distance growing between us. It wasn't just the lack of communication, it was the unspoken resentment that seemed to hang in the air whenever we did speak. I had hoped she would come around, but instead she seemed more distant and even a bit cold. For the first few days I thought maybe things would settle down. But then Emma started calling me again, only this time her tone was sharper. I really need you to babysit tonight. It's last minute, but Dan's interview got moved up and I don't have anyone else to help. I hesitated. I had a few things planned for the evening, catching up on work, some personal time, but I knew that if I said no, Emma would be furious. I didn't want to make things worse, so I reluctantly agreed, trying to remind myself that it wasn't going to be a permanent arrangement. When I arrived at her house that evening, I was greeted by an exhausted Emma and two very energetic kids. Luke was running around the living room, while Sophia clung to Emma's leg, refusing to let go. Emma didn't seem to notice how frazzled she looked. She handed me the kids' dinner and then quickly rushed out the door, leaving me with the mess. As the hours passed, I began to feel like I was in over my head. The kids were getting more difficult to manage and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being used as a free resource. I cooked, cleaned, and entertained the kids, all while Emma's absence seemed to grow longer. By the time she returned, it was almost 11 p.m. Thanks so much for helping out, she said in a rush, as though she hadn't even realized how late it was. I was gone longer than I thought. I really appreciate it. I nodded stiffly. No problem, I said, though the words felt hollow. As she ushered me out, I couldn't help but feel resentful. I had just spent an entire evening running around after her kids, barely managing to keep up, and now she was acting like it was no big deal. I was exhausted, but there was no recognition of how much I had given up to be there for her. The next few days passed in a blur. Emma started calling me more frequently, asking for help with the kids, or for me to watch them while she went to run errands, or even just to give her a break. Each time I was torn between wanting to help and feeling like I was being taken advantage of. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting babysitting session, I finally snapped. Emma had asked me again to watch the kids, this time for an entire weekend so she could attend a work conference. I had plans to visit a friend who had just moved into a new apartment, but once again I found myself canceling to accommodate Emma's needs. When I called her to confirm the details, I couldn't help but let my frustration slip through. Emma, I've already rearranged my entire weekend for you. I'm happy to help, but I can't keep doing this all the time. She was quiet for a moment before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who else to ask. Dan can't babysit and I don't have anyone else. Please, I'm begging you. I felt a pang of guilt, but then I reminded myself that I had been saying yes to her without thinking of my own needs for far too long. I understand, but you can't keep expecting me to do this for free. I have my own life, Emma. I can't just be your personal babysitter whenever you need me. Her response was cold and I could hear the edge in her voice. You're being selfish, you know that? I'm the one who's struggling here. I need help and you can't even step up for me. I'm your sister. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to explain how much I had already been doing for her, but I also knew that no matter what I said she wouldn't understand. She was too wrapped up in her own stress to see how much I was sacrificing. I'm doing what I can, but I can't keep putting my own life on hold for you. I'm sorry, Emma, I said, my voice firm. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, Emma sighed. Fine. I'll figure it out myself. I hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. I had stood up for myself, but it had come at the cost of my relationship with Emma. I wasn't sure if she would ever understand, but at that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. I spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and frustration. Emma's words echoed in my mind, her accusation that I was being selfish replaying over and over. The guilt crept in, but I kept reminding myself that I was entitled to prioritize my own life. I wasn't her personal babysitter and I had the right to say no. I had to admit, though, that things between us felt different now. I'd always been the kind of person who would drop everything to help family, but this time I had drawn a line, and it felt like Emma wasn't just mad at me, she was hurt and I wasn't sure how to fix it. Several days went by without much contact. Emma didn't call. She didn't text. It was as if she had cut me out of her life, and in a way I understood. She was angry, and when Emma got angry she withdrew completely. I tried to reach out once or twice, sending a message asking how she was doing, but she didn't respond. I threw myself into my new babysitting job, trying to ignore the growing tension between us. It felt good to finally do something for myself. The family I was working for, Sarah and Mark, were kind and respectful. They always acknowledged my efforts and paid me on time. The kids were sweet and they listened to me without question. It felt like a professional relationship, one where I was valued for my time and energy. But every time I left their house, my thoughts would inevitably return to Emma. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something wrong. Then one morning I received a text from her. "Can we talk?" It was simple, but it made my heart skip a beat. I was torn between relief and dread. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to expect. I agreed to meet her at a local cafe later that afternoon. When I walked in, Emma was already sitting at a table, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen her. But there was something else in her eyes too, a mixture of frustration and hurt. I sat down opposite her, unsure of what to say. She didn't waste any time. "I've been thinking about what you said," Emma began, her voice soft but firm. "And I realize I was wrong. I shouldn't have demanded that you help me all the time. I guess I was just so overwhelmed with everything going on that I didn't see how unfair it was to you." I was taken aback. This wasn't the response I had expected. I had braced myself for more anger, maybe even more accusations. But instead she seemed remorseful. "I've been trying to juggle everything. Dan losing his job, the kids, my work, and I just didn't know who else to turn to. You were always there for me and I think I took that for granted," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond." The apology was unexpected and for a moment I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But then as I processed her words, I realized something. "Emma, I understand that you're going through a lot. But I can't keep being your go-to babysitter without any boundaries. I have my own life. I want to help, but I need you to respect my time too." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "I get it. I really do. And I promise I won't ask you for free babysitting again. But I'm going to need help. I can't afford to pay for full-time childcare and Dan's job search isn't going well. I don't know what I'm going to do." I paused, considering her words. This was the hardest part, the fact that she was still struggling and asking for help, but this time it wasn't an ultimatum. She wasn't demanding. She was asking, and there was a difference. "I can help, but I need to be compensated, Emma. I can't keep sacrificing my own time for free. I found a paid babysitting job and I'm going to stick with it. But if you need help occasionally, I'm happy to help, but we need to set up some boundaries." There was a long silence. I could see Emma processing what I had said, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy for her to accept. "I understand," she finally said. "I was just hoping you'd be there for me without me having to ask. But I get it. And I'll respect your boundaries. I don't want to lose you over this." I could see that she was trying, really trying, to understand where I was coming from, and that meant a lot to me. "I don't want to lose you either," I said quietly. "But I have to take care of myself first. I can't be there for you if I'm not taking care of my own needs." We sat in silence for a few more moments, both of us reflecting on the conversation. Finally, Emma broke the silence again. "I'll figure something out. Maybe I can look into a local daycare or find a sitter that I can pay. But I'll respect your decision. I promise." It wasn't a perfect resolution and I wasn't sure what would happen next. But I knew this conversation was a step in the right direction. We had set the boundaries and now it was up to both of us to respect them. As I left the cafe that afternoon, I felt a sense of relief. I had stood up for myself, but I had also shown Emma that I still cared. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least we were both willing to try. The weeks following my conversation with Emma were tense but promising. We had set boundaries and I had hoped that things would start to normalize. But it wasn't as simple as just saying no to her requests and being done with it. I still felt the weight of our past interactions and Emma's struggles seemed to continue, leaving me with mixed feelings of guilt and frustration. Despite the promises she made, it didn't take long for Emma to start testing the limits. It started with small requests again. Can you pick up the kids after school today? Or I'm swamped with work. Can you take them to soccer practice? I found myself saying yes a few times, partly because I genuinely wanted to help, and partly because I knew that refusing would cause tension. But each time it began to feel like a step backward. It wasn't until one weekend in late fall that I realized how much I had let myself slip back into old habits. Emma reached out again, asking for help with the kids while she and Dan went to a wedding out of town. I was already feeling drained from my own job, and I had plans to visit a friend who was in town for the weekend. When Emma called, her voice was tinged with desperation. Please, I've asked everyone else and they're all busy or unavailable. I don't know what else to do. I felt the familiar pang of guilt as she spoke. It wasn't that I didn't want to help her. It was that I had already helped her so many times without question and I was exhausted. But I also knew that if I didn't help, she would think I didn't care. I can't do the whole weekend, Emma. I have plans, I said, my voice firm but gentle. But I can help you on Saturday afternoon for a few hours if that works. There was a long pause and when Emma spoke again, her tone was sharp. I need help for the whole weekend, not just a few hours. I can't keep asking Dan's parents and you're the only one I can rely on. Are you really going to leave me hanging like this? Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I had been trying to set boundaries, trying to prioritize my own life. And yet there she was, making me feel guilty for doing exactly what we had agreed on. I'm not leaving you hanging, Emma. I told you I can't do the whole weekend. I've got my own commitments, I replied, my patience starting to wear thin. And you know I'm happy to help, but I can't just drop everything every time you ask. Emma didn't respond immediately. I could hear her breathing and I knew she was angry. Finally she spoke, her voice low and tight with frustration. Fine. I'll figure it out myself. I don't know why I bother asking you for help if you're always going to make excuses. I felt a pang of disappointment, but I stood my ground. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to be honest with you. I can't be your emergency backup all the time, Emma. The call ended abruptly and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. I had done what was best for me, but I knew that I had hurt Emma in the process. It was never easy for me to stand firm with her, especially when I could hear how upset she was. But I also knew that if I didn't, I would continue to lose myself in her demands. The next few days were quiet. Emma didn't reach out and I didn't contact her either. It was the first time in a while that we hadn't been in constant communication, and it felt like a strange kind of peace. But there was an underlying tension, a sense that we were both waiting for something to give. Then on Thursday afternoon I received a text from Emma. It was short and to the point. Can you come by tomorrow to talk? I immediately felt a mix of dread and curiosity. What did she want? Had our conversation about boundaries really sunk in, or was she going to accuse me again of not being there for her? I agreed to meet her the next day, but I didn't know what to expect. When I arrived at her house, she was sitting on the couch, looking much calmer than I had anticipated. There was no anger in her eyes, no defensiveness, just a quiet, almost sad resignation. She motioned for me to sit down, and I hesitated for a moment before joining her. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Emma began, her voice quieter than usual. And I realize I haven't been fair to you. I've been putting too much pressure on you, expecting you to always help without considering what you need. I'm sorry for that. Her words caught me off guard. This wasn't the Emma I knew, the one who would lash out when things didn't go her way. This was someone who was taking accountability, and that was something I had never expected. I've been stressed and I've been selfish, she continued. I didn't see how hard it was for you until now. And I just wanted to say that I'm really sorry. I'll try to do better. I sat there trying to process everything she was saying. It was like a weight was being lifted off my chest, but it wasn't completely gone. I couldn't forget all the times I had put my own needs aside, but hearing her apologize meant more than I could express. I appreciate you saying that, Emma. I really do, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. But I need you to understand that I can't always be the one to help. I need to take care of myself too. I understand, she said softly. And I won't ask you for free babysitting anymore. I'll figure things out. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of everything that had happened. For the first time in a long time, I felt like there was real hope for our relationship to heal. I'm glad we talked, I said after a while. And I'm here for you, Emma. But I need you to respect my boundaries. I will, she promised. Thank you for being patient with me. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And as I left her house that afternoon, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The weeks that followed were a test of patience, both for me and for Emma. We had set boundaries, and while that had been a step in the right direction, the real challenge was figuring out how to maintain them without letting old patterns creep back in. I knew that this wasn't going to be an overnight fix. Relationships, especially with family, were complex, and the trust that had been damaged over the years couldn't be repaired with a simple apology. But things had started to feel more balanced, and that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. The first few days after our conversation were awkward, as though we were both walking on eggshells. We exchanged polite texts, small updates about the kids, and a few check-ins on each other's lives. But I could tell that Emma was still processing everything. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or just a fear of pushing too hard, but she kept her distance. I respected that. It was going to take time. Then about 2 weeks later, Emma called me unexpectedly. I didn't recognize her number at first, and I hesitated before answering. But when I did, her voice was warm, not tense. Hey, I just wanted to check in, she said. How are you doing? It was a small thing, but I appreciated the effort. The conversation flowed easily, without the undercurrent of obligation or resentment that had colored our past talks. It was just two sisters talking about life. We spoke about work, about the kids, and about the mundane things that always seemed to come up in family conversations. It felt normal again. But as the conversation drew to a close, Emma surprised me with something I didn't expect. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she continued. And I've made a decision. I'm going to start looking for a part-time job to help with childcare. I know I can't rely on you all the time, and I want to do better for myself and the kids. I don't want to keep putting all of this on you. My heart warmed at her words. This was the Emma I had always hoped for, the one who was strong enough to admit when she needed to make a change. It wasn't easy for her to ask for help, let alone take responsibility for her actions, and this felt like a huge step forward for her. I'm proud of you, Emma, I said, my voice sincere. That's exactly what I've been hoping for. You don't have to do everything by yourself, but you also don't have to carry the weight of it all. I know, she replied. And I've been talking to Dan about it. We're going to figure out a new plan. Thanks for being patient with me. After that call, things began to shift. Emma started looking into local daycare options and part-time jobs that would allow her to balance her responsibilities. She wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when she would lean on me for support, but the difference was in how she asked. There was a new level of respect between us. Respect for each other's time, for our own lives, and for the understanding that we were both doing the best we could. A few weeks later, she invited me over for dinner. It felt like a celebration of sorts, a way to acknowledge the changes that had happened between us. She had made progress, and so had I. We sat at her kitchen table eating homemade pasta and talking about everything and nothing at all. For the first time in a while, I felt like we were equals again. I'm still learning, she said quietly as we finished dinner. I'm trying to get better at this, at managing everything. But it's hard. I'm not going to lie. I know, I said, offering her a small smile. But you're doing it. You're making changes. She smiled back, and for a moment I could see the sister I had always known. Strong, determined, and willing to do the work to make things better. As the months passed, things between us continued to improve. Emma found a part-time job that allowed her to get the extra childcare she needed, and I found a balance between helping her and prioritizing my own life. We both learned to ask for what we needed without guilt and to respect each other's boundaries. I still spent time with the kids, but it was different now. I wasn't constantly feeling overwhelmed by the demands of babysitting. It was a choice, not an obligation. And every time I said no to a request, I reminded myself that it was okay. I wasn't abandoning Emma. I was taking care of myself so that I could be there for her in the ways that truly mattered. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I had learned through this entire experience was that boundaries were not just a form of self-care. They were a way to strengthen relationships. By setting limits, I had shown Emma that I valued myself, and in turn she had learned to value me more. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like Emma and I were on the same page. We were both doing the work, and that was something worth celebrating.